For the purposes of this content, best shall be defined as most preferred by Pater Franson when compared to a limited sample of alternatives. Hey guys, Pater Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. 2021 was the year we all hoped things would get back to normal, but instead we learned to kind of accept a new normal, and meanwhile, video game developers continued to work out the kinks involved in making games remotely under otherwise very different circumstances, which combined with the setbacks in 2020 meant delays for a number of video games we are still seeing as we start into 2022. So, like the year before it, 2021 ran a bit short on new games that I personally enjoyed a lot. In fact, my new games list is only a top 5, and even of those, there are only 1 or 2 that have really, truly hooked me. So instead of a list of my picks for 10 best new games of 2021, once again, I'm going to give you my top 5 new games of 2021, along with my top 5 older games that I discovered or came back to in 2021. I think both lists, especially my new games list, but I think both lists include some games that are pretty different from what many others would choose. So my hope is that you'll be inspired to maybe try out some games you overlooked or return to and enjoy some of your old favorites that you'd forgotten about this year. So we're going to start with my top 5 legacy games that I enjoyed playing in 2021. These are games that came out before 2021, but I really enjoyed playing last year. Number 5 is Shakedown Hawaii. It's a retro pixel graphics, top-down open city mayhem simulator inspired by early entries in the Grand Theft Auto series. Although in tone it reminds me a lot more of the Saints Row games. With a lot of traveling to do over the summer, I wanted to find a game that could effectively scratch my open world itch on the go, and finally found one. I really felt like Shakedown Hawaii delivered what I wanted. It's a casual, goofy game where you play as a retired crime boss whose illegitimate businesses have failed while he wasn't looking, and so he has to rebuild his empire from the ground up. Numerous funny cutscenes that highlight how dated and out of touch he is give context to the largely repetitive but fun missions involving widespread chaotic mayhem inflicted upon pixelated people all over town. It's pretty easy even for a lousy player like me, and works perfectly as a jump in and play arcadey sort of experience that also satisfies my love for checking boxes and watching stat numbers go up as you take over different establishments and they start raking in the dough for your illegitimate empire. It's not a game I ever played in long sessions or exclusively, but Shakedown Hawaii was such a great palate cleanser, and one I've come back to and enjoyed a few times even after getting home from that summer vacation and having access to big AAA games again. Number 4 on my legacy games list is Skyrim. You can all blame me for Bethesda's lack of motivation to get us a new Elder Scrolls game sooner. I am part of the problem, everybody. I'm one of the many players who keeps coming back to Skyrim again and again. This time, all it took was the free anniversary update given to players who own Skyrim Special Edition and a PS5 or a Series X/S. Without even buying the anniversary edition, the native PS5 version that boosts frame rate and adds the Creation Club survival mode for free was a literal game changer for me. Yes, there are free mods that add survival mechanics, and the default Creation Club survival mod has things that I don't like, but it's a great foundation, I think, that modders have built on so that I can play with a survival mode that makes the world come more alive without becoming tedious. Now I regularly stay at inns that I always ignored before, and their blazing hearths almost radiate welcoming warmth through my screen. I cook, I eat, I sleep, and as a result feel more surrounded by the world than ever before. Now, at the end of the day, it's still Skyrim, and so I don't know that the free anniversary updates alone will get me back in for another 100 hours, but when combined with other massive, high-quality content mods, like, say, the Forgotten Dungeons, which I've really been enjoying, I wouldn't be surprised if I put in another 100 or even 200 hours into Skyrim before at least the next main entry in the Elder Scrolls series. So again, I'm sorry, everybody. I am part of the problem. Number 3 on my Legacy Games list is Darkest Dungeon. As I said, I did, really an unusual amount of traveling last summer and made sure my PlayStation Vita was loaded up with games that would keep me from missing my PS5 too much. But despite having a lot of options, the vast majority of my on-the-go gaming was in Darkest Dungeon, which was also on my Legacy Games list last year. Once I understood the game enough to know what I was doing, I took advantage of the numerous gameplay settings options that Red Hook included, making it an enjoyably intense but not truly punishing experience. And with the settings I have in play, it sits in that perfect sweet spot for me of tactical complexity where I do have to think and be intentional about every turn for every character, but those choices don't require more than a few seconds of thought, keeping the flow of the game always moving forward. And the aesthetics across the board, music, sound effects, writing, voice acting, and art all continue to hold up for me as the most delightfully disturbing take on Lovecraftian horror I've ever seen in a game. I don't know if I'll be interested in Darkest Dungeon 2 based on what I've been seeing and the changes that they've made, but I've gotten so many hours of enjoyment from the original Darkest Dungeon, and I suspect it will continue to be my go-to turn-based dungeon crawl well into 2022. My number 2 legacy game is Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Breakpoint, and this game has now replaced Ghost Recon Wildlands on my favorite games of all time list. Eventually, through numerous updates and free content additions, Breakpoint became really a very different game than the launch version, with, to my experience, completely unrivaled gameplay customization options, not just related to difficulty, but actually manipulating the world and core gameplay systems. If you played this at launch and didn't enjoy Ghost Recon Breakpoint at launch, it might be worth your time to try again. Chances are whatever you didn't like about the gameplay, you can change to better suit your tastes, and it is very often on sale as well. I've spent over 200 hours playing the main campaign and sweeping every location clean of upgrades and collectibles, and I'm still looking forward to playing the free Operation Motherland game mode, which essentially adds a new alternate campaign for free. And a copy of the game also comes with the Friend Pass, which allows a friend who downloads the trial version of the game to play with you without any time limits, as long as they're playing with you. Many other games add free content, but it largely, in those cases, feels like, more of what you already like. In the case of Ghost Recon Breakpoint, I feel like Ubisoft has continued to add content that allows you to have a significantly fresh experience with each of those major content drops. It just feels like the game that keeps on giving. And Ghost Recon Breakpoint is one that I will likely continue to keep installed and coming back to for a long time. Number 1 on my legacy list, Monster Hunter World. With the Iceborne expansion, 2021 was the year I finished the main story, finally, of the Iceborne expansion, and found to my delight that there is a ton of post-game content and new monsters to find and learn how to hunt. Since buying this game in 2018, I have now spent what is to me a staggering more than 800 solo hours, essentially fighting the same 2 dozen monsters over and over again. I mean, there is a time I never would have believed that could be fun. And in most any other game, I don't think it would be. But Monster Hunter World isn't just another game. It's sort of a hobby to itself. And part of that, a major part of that, is due to the complexity and the behavior of these monsters and how they really do seem to have kind of a life to them at a glance. This is a hobby. It's not just one of my games. It is in a different category. And I'm a hunter. I hunt. I'm a hunter. And between hunts, I prepare, which in itself involves hunting and thinking and planning. I have documents where I've written out both short and long-term goals and how I plan to achieve them. I get online to learn from the community of hunters, discovering new strategies and equipment loadouts to best fit my playstyle, which is still largely button mashing. In fact, only after passing the 800-hour mark did I figure out how to predictably pull off a particular move while fighting a monster. So I'm still kind of learning the ropes. I'm not a skilled player, and I hate fail screens. But it's pretty unusual for me to get knocked out, and extremely rare for me to fail out of a mission, because through research and patience, I discovered ways I could grind and prepare to compensate for my lack of reflex skills. And finding victory on that path is so immensely satisfying for me. I once thought that Skyrim or Neverwinter Nights was the game that I had certainly put the largest number of total hours into, but I discovered this year that Monster Hunter World with the Iceborne expansion has blown those numbers out of the water. I would not be at all surprised if I reach the 1,000 hour mark this year or next. The long and short of it is simply this: Monster Hunter World is still shockingly, to me, one of my absolute favorite games of all time. Now, on to my picks for the 5 best video games released in 2020. This list is probably going to be a little bit anticlimactic because I'm just not as buzzed and excited about these games as the other games. The most fun I had playing video games was not playing games largely that came out in 2021. But anyway, number 5 on my list, and I still think all these games are worth checking out. Hybroxia 2 is my number 5. I'm always on the lookout for games that are part of classic genres I was never able to enjoy as a kid because of their difficulty. Usually games in this category that I'm looking for have added some kind of RPG mechanics that allow me to grind my way out of trouble. For example, in the world of side-scrolling platformers, I love the Symphony of the Night style Castlevania games that allow me to grind for XP and loot to compensate for my lack of skill and my lack of tolerance for failure. Indie developer Lilymo Games released Hybroxia on consoles in 2019, which is a callback to side-scrolling space shooters like R-Type or Gradius, but with an added upgrade system that allows you to replay levels to stockpile credits you can use to increase your ship's offensive and defensive abilities and stats. Hybroxia 2 released on consoles in February of 2021 and improved the controls, graphics, and sound while also building upon the upgrade system of the first game. It was one of the few games I reviewed last year that I wanted to come back to after my review process was done. It took me a while, however, because I still hadn't finished the first game and really wanted to see that through before moving on to the sequel, so I actually just barely started back into Hybroxia 2 in November, and it still remains installed on my PS5 as a nice little snack when I want to take a few bites before settling into a bigger game for an evening. Number 4 on my best games list for 2021 is Rogue Wizards. I am really not a fan of the roguelike or roguelite genres, mainly because I hate losing progress. I want to constantly feel like my character is gaining power and moving forward, but some games that lean on the words rogue something in their description don't necessarily have that punishing start all over again gameplay. Rogue Wizards is a roguelite in that it is turn-based, and for every action you take, the enemy takes an action as you explore grid-based dungeons from an isometric view. It has a more Saturday morning cartoon visual aesthetic than I would prefer, but also has great enemy, equipment, and loot variety, as well as a nice progression system, none of which is interrupted or taken away if you die. Best of all for me, you get to play a dedicated magic user class. Although ultimately I'd prefer a lot more spell variety, and the cartoony aesthetic and flash-like animation style keep me from being hooked in long stretches, Rogue Wizards has been a nice addition to my collection of dungeon-crawling RPGs. Number 3 is Record of Lodoss War Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth. This one was released near the end of 2021, and I didn't get around to playing it until the new year. You can watch my recent review to get my thoughts. Basically, it's a clone of the Symphony-like Castlevania games that adds something new, primarily in the form of elemental attacks and corresponding enemy strengths and weaknesses. It's easily, I think, the best-looking game of its type that uses true blue 2D pixel graphics instead of the 2.5D employed by Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. It's not higher on my list because I'm still less than 5 hours into it and not sure what I'll think when all is said and done, but for now I can safely say that I'm really enjoying it and plan to see it through to the end. Symphony-likes are among my favorite types of video games, and it was a real treat to discover this hidden gem with an overly busy name. Again, that's Record of Lodoss War Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth. Number 2 is Zhuan Yuan Sword 7. I'm probably saying that wrong. Anyway, Zhuan Yuan Sword 7. It's a weird name, so I'm going to say it as many times as I can here to help you guys help it stick in your brains, because I think it's worth checking out. Xuanyuan Sword 7 was a game I honestly might not have ever played if the developer had not given me a review code for it. For those who missed my review, I would describe it as an action RPG that still rewards exploration despite its linear structure. You are on a quest to restore the body of a young girl who is on the brink of death, but still travels with you by using a temporary wooden puppet-like body that her spirit inhabits. She and your other AI companion fight with you and can even be commanded to carry out special attacks with just the press of a button. On the easy difficulty that I keep it on, it's a really satisfying experience for me, especially those moments in combat where I sequence together AI special attacks in just the right way to take out multiple enemies at once. They really kind of, their special attacks really kind of complement each other well. The game has English subtitles, but only a Chinese voice track, which I just turn off. The translation can be clunky at times, but I can make it work well enough in my head. Works better for me than keeping the Chinese on for whatever reason. In fact, the way I play Xuanyuan Sword 7 reminds me of my experience playing JRPGs back on the SNES and PlayStation 1. Although the setting is ancient China, the enemies give off a surprisingly Western fantasy vibe that reminds me some of the Lord of the Rings movies. It's an interesting blend of both Asian and Western aesthetics, I think. The story isn't doing anything for me, as is the case with almost all games that I play, and the gameplay isn't something I want full on for multiple nights at a time. But when I want to change it up for a bit, after, like, say, lots of open-world goodness or in-depth monster hunting, Xuanyuan Sword 7 is the game I find myself repeatedly surprised I'm coming back to and enjoying for what it is. A solid, serious fantasy action RPG in the AA publisher space. Okay, I'm sneaking in a bonus entry here. Castlevania Advance Collection. I really want to make Castlevania Advance Collection number 2 on my list. I really do, but I can't, on something of a technicality. As I mentioned before, the symphony-like genre, as I call it, is one of my favorite types of video games, period. And if you enjoyed Castlevania Symphony of the Night, but missed Castlevania Circle of the Moon, Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, and Castlevania Aria of Sorrow on the Game Boy Advance, I cannot recommend these games highly enough. It also comes with a fourth game, but that one's more like the punishing original 2D Castlevania game, so I don't even think about that. I own all 3 of these games for the Game Boy Advance, and I played them through more than once each on my Retron 5, so I was able to enjoy them on a full-size TV with even some graphic enhancements to smooth out the jaggies. So I had no personal motivation to buy this collection because I was hardcore enough to hunt them down and play them on a Retron 5. And so because I haven't actually purchased and played this collection, I can't recommend it based on firsthand experience. However, I have not heard reports of it having technical problems on any platform, which would be the only reason I would hesitate to recommend it. Even at the full asking price of $20, that's less than $7 each for these 3 fantastic games that alone, each of them, are nearly just as fun as Castlevania Symphony of the Night, or just as fun in some cases. For fans of that game, I had to include mentioning Castlevania Advance Collection, and I highly recommend checking it out. And number 1 on my list for 2021, Far Cry 6. Despite not being able to speak only in enthusiastically glowing terms about most of the other games on this list, for this year, Far Cry 6 might have been my number 1 game of the year, even in a year full of other games I really enjoyed a lot. Since my review of Far Cry 6, I'm now much deeper into the game and have hit the sweet spot groove, that Ubisoft just one more mission flavor I sometimes can't get enough of in a single night. I'm finding that the upgrade system doesn't yet anyway, allow me to have the guaranteed one-shot sniper kills I've enjoyed in past Far Cry games. That's a bit of a bummer, but once I accepted that, and since I'm still scratching that particular itch in Ghost Recon Breakpoint, I've begun enjoying Far Cry 6 for the experience of sneaking into outposts up close and personal instead, taking out bad guys with my silenced pistol until I'm spotted and the liquid poop hits the exploding van. On story mode, I'm only rarely close to seeing a fail screen, and so I get that Terminator or Die Hard power fantasy I come to these kinds of games for, while also enjoying Ubisoft's ability to transport me into their game worlds through their beautiful, realistic visuals and detailed sound design. And while I do wish the upgrade system worked a bit differently, my net result experience is still a ton of what I want, and Ubisoft has finally given me what feels like truly free access to the entire open world from the get-go, while so far leaving annoying kidnappings or other forced situations out of the main mission designs. With each game, they seem to strip away more and more of those elements I dislike while giving me more of what I enjoy. When all is said and done, I would not be surprised at all if I feel like Far Cry 6 is my new favorite in the series, and it's easily my favorite game released in 2021. Finally, as I do each year, I pick out one game that I found to be the most thought-provoking game released in 2021, and after some thought, I arrived at Biomutant. Biomutant wasn't my cup of tea enough to stick with it past the 5 hours I played to review it, but those 5 hours contained possibly the largest number of head-scratching, thought-provoking moments of any game I can think of. I almost want to give Biomutant a subtitle, like Biomutant, what do you mean by that? Because it is generously peppered with worldview and philosophy statements that are clear enough that I can tell the writer wanted to say something worthwhile, but vague enough that I don't really know what they said. I think it's safe to say that the writing is more influenced by a naturalistic or at most agnostic worldview of some kind rather than, say, any theistic perspective. And to the degree that it leans in that naturalistic direction, its well-intentioned moralism actually kind of cuts itself off at the knees because of the ultimate lack of foundation to be found for objective or even very persuasive moral values when starting from a naturalistic perspective. Now, I won't go into the details here, but I would recommend you watch my review of Biomutant, which I will link to below in the video version of this. You can use the timestamps then to jump straight to my comments on Biomutant's worldview, where I demonstrate, I think, how many of its well-intentioned moral statements actually fall apart when examined beyond just kind of a surface glance. I think that game is a reminder to me to invite people, Christians and non-Christians I'm talking about here, to expand on what they mean when they say something they believe in that I don't quite understand. I think in conversations it's often safer and easier and, sometimes the better option than just making things awkward or contentious. But it's often safer and easier to simply nod and sort of when someone shares something that sounds spiritual or maybe profound in some way, but it's actually pretty vague and we're not sure we understand what they're getting at. But if we do it tactfully and graciously, a lot of good can come from simply saying, "Oh, that's interesting. What do you mean by that?" Or something else that's genuinely inquisitive with an interest in better understanding where they are coming from. Sometimes by simply asking questions, we can discover where we actually agree or disagree with others, or bring about verbal processing of their thoughts on their part that will lead them to see their view in a more accurate light, simply by them having to articulate it for us. Without agenda, confrontation, or debate, we can bring conversations to some really worthwhile places by simply asking, "What do you mean by that?" And that's it for 2021. Hopefully a somewhat different and more interesting list than maybe you expected. I don't know. What new or old games did you really enjoy playing in 2021? Or what game came out last year that's really triggered some worthwhile thought for you? I would love to hear about that in the comments below. And don't forget to check out the Christian Geek Central podcast as well as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.